Transition over. There we go. A little bit of a delay on my side. Fix this camera view as well. There we go. Excellent. Much better now. So, Dr. Garrett McGovern, thanks very much for taking the time out of your Saturday. I'm sure you could think of 101 other things that you could be doing and enjoying your day today, but you're here chatting with me. So for that, thanks very much. I really do appreciate it. And it's an honour to have you on as well. I've been following the work that you've been doing over the years and how outspoken you've been against some of the current drug policies here as well. And I have to commend and tip my hat to you there and that, because it's obviously not an easy thing to do given your position. To be kind of questioning things like that. Otherwise, I'd imagine other doctors in your position would be doing it, but the stigma is certainly large there. So welcome, Dr. Garrett McGovern, and thanks for taking the time out of your day for me today. So I suppose if we could start, yourself, where did this all start for yourself with the becoming an addiction specialist? What motivated you to go down that road to get that into that line of work?
It was a total fluke, actually. I was working as a junior doctor in hospitals, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with my career. I had thought about maybe the possibility of doing emergency medicine, because I spent a year in emergency medicine in Vincent's Hospital in Dublin, and I really enjoyed it. I then did 6 months as kind of a house doctor in Waterford, and then I took 6 months off, and it was during that 6 months off that colleague of mine and a friend who worked in Vincent's for many years contacted me and asked me, would you be interested in doing drug clinics? I didn't really know what he meant by drug clinics. He just said that a guy had rang and that they were opening drug clinics, and he wondered would I be interested. I didn't really question what it meant. I actually thought what he was talking about was pharmaceutical clinics or something. I didn't really get the link between drugs and, say, illicit drugs or psychoactive drugs. So it's amazing the way things happen in life, because I rang the guy and he said, look, it's actually drug treatment, it's to do with heroin. And I was kind of a bit wary of that, because I had probably the same stereotypical view of that as anybody else. And I said, that sounds a bit dangerous. I thought maybe, I don't know about this. And he said, look, he was a really nice guy on the phone, the chap. And he said, look, I run a clinic down in Bagot Street in Dublin. Would you come down and, would you like to meet me? And I said, well, fair enough. Okay. And it's funny, the morning I met him, I was really a whisker away from staying under the duvet, if I'm honest. Something in me said, no, I'll do it. I'll go down and meet the guy. And I went down and met him. And the guy I met was Cathal O'Sullivan. He was the guy who I first met. And you know Cathal, he's been involved in a lot of this work, probably not as active as me. He's retired now, well, semi-retired. You can never really retire away from this work. And I met him, and I started to do a clinic in an area local to me. It was a health centre. I have to be frank and say that the education and the training was non-existent, really. We laugh about that now. We shouldn't laugh, but like, Cathal was doing it wrong, and he was teaching me how to do it wrong.
Okay.
So I was treating people. How I didn't kill them, I don't bloody know, but the training was just lamentably poor. But I started to do the work anyway, and I continued to do kind of GP locums, and I was still meandering around the place. And then about a year and a half later, a post position came up full-time to do it. And I was kind of getting a bit tired of going around the country doing locums. And I said, fuck it, I'd like to do this. So I started to do it full-time, and then it expanded from there. I went away and got trained, did a master's in it, and other postgraduate qualifications and that sort of stuff. And I really, really liked it, and nice. I was delighted, really, that I fell into this. Nobody will complete medical school and want to go in and be an addiction specialist. That just didn't happen that way. And then it moved from there. You're probably wondering how I got involved in the whole drug policy side of it, because for many years I wasn't involved in the drug policy side. I got kind of really involved. It's hard to know when, but I think probably the key turning point in terms of it was Ming's bill in 2013.
Yeah.
I can't remember. My memory is a little bit hazy as to, I don't think a whole lot was happening with drug policy in this country prior to Ming's. I mean, I often really praise Ming for what he did, because he sometimes doesn't get the credit for a lot of what he did, because the bill that he put forward, as you'll know, Martin, was roundly kind of defeated, 103-5 or something ridiculous. But it was actually a victory in many ways, because it kind of put cannabis on the map. And although, and we'll talk about this more, we're very, very slow in realizing a lot of the aspirations. Without Ming's bill, I'm not sure whether I'd go as far as to say we wouldn't be here today, because obviously Gino followed Ming, and there's a lot of other activist work been done. But I think really I have to give great credit to Ming to do what he did, because he had a reputation going way back to the 90s, when he sent the joints out to the politicians and stuff, as been some kind of lunatic. And he was far from a lunatic, and he might not be everyone's favorite cup of tea, but he got it right with cannabis. And when his bill was being put out, I was happy to be on board in that, and there was a bit of media coverage and stuff like that. So that's when the drug policy stuff started. I can't remember any major drug policy stories in Ireland before Ming, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I wouldn't be aware of any others, really. The earliest I'm aware of is the guys who were campaigning in Cork, a lecturer by the name of Tim McCarthy, I think it might have been, and also the guy who's gone on to do the Hot Press magazine afterwards. Name is eluding me as well at the moment. I think they were like the early 90s. They had a cannabis legalisation party down here in Cork, But really, between then and Ming, that there was nothing really happened. I don't think the guys were really into stunts like Ming either, so they never really put themselves on the map. But I would definitely agree with you there that Luke Ming Flanagan certainly deserves to be acknowledged in the work that he done, because he really did, I suppose, to look at it, he broke the ice. He broke the ice to get the conversation started, while the bill, it got largely defeated. But there was a success there in that the conversation was happening, people's minds were open to this kind of idea now. So he did definitely, he made it a lot easier, because if Ming didn't happen back then we would have had Gino coming along, and we would have been just starting from there then. So we're much further down the road. Very much thanks to the likes of Ming and yourself and Cahill as well. I believe it was Normal Ireland yourself and Cahill were working with at the time, if memory serves correct. Oh, I think I lost your audio there, Garrett.
Yeah, can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Loud and clear. Yeah,
We're back in. Don't mind the dog in the background.
he's
He likes to
gorgeous.
want that Snowball. Nice dog. He likes to bark at people outside the window, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. It's very hard to know. I mean, there's certain people that I remember being involved with. I remember going down with Cahill around that time. Graham DeBarra down on Galway. Sean, surname
Sean Lynch.
Sean Lynch, and we did a really good. We had a really good day down there. I think Tom Lloyd was there,
That's
Ming was
right.
there, and you know, there was a lot of great work been done, and it's very tough, Martin. In this, I mean, you mentioned at the top of this that, you know, I'm out there on my own a little bit to a large extent. I don't mind that. The funny thing about it is, after you've been doing this and having the similar opinions for as long as I have, it doesn't seem to be that strange anymore. And if you look at what's happening in America and in other parts of the world in relation to drug policy, it's you know, a seemingly sort of left wing, left of field opinion is now moving to the centre an awful lot more. We're well behind the times in Ireland in relation to cannabis. So it is tough sometimes that, like, for instance, in the medical profession, largely the medical profession doesn't seem to be interested in drug policy. There are notable people, mainly on the against side, and we all know you all know who they are. And I have to say this, I must say this, that it's very easy to, you know, do a podcast like this and criticize the opposition and their point of view. The one thing I will praise them for is that they're interested in it. I mean, you have to say that the ones that really worry me in the medical professions are the ones that just are completely indifferent to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you can be indifferent to it. Like, it's a really big issue. It's a very topical issue. It occupies a lot of column inches. The public are generally kind of interested in it, but the medical profession have just kind of gone completely quiet on it. And, you know, I'm obviously involved in the therapeutic and treatment side of things. I never really believed that our drug strategy, and it's really ailing at the moment. I have to say that I really kind of despair at the moment the way our drug policies are gone in this country. You know, we're not even at the, you know, at one stage we were at the aspirational and hopeful stage of things are going to happen with medically supervised injecting rooms, medical cannabis, and hopefully regulating cannabis, you know, all forms of cannabis. But it's sort of stalled. I don't know if you kind of feel that yourself. Things have really stalled. And really the point, I suppose, is that our national drug strategy, you know, is not thorough enough. It doesn't take into account the harms or the consequences of prohibition. It seems to concentrate on, it seems to be more of a commentary, an aspirational thing. I mean, you never mind all that. We don't even see the stuff that's fairly non-contentious, doesn't even seem to see the light of day. So, you know, we talk about drug strategies and they usually last for about, I think it's about 8 years, 9 years, you know. I think the current one is 2017 to 2025.
Yeah.
They seem to be the same drug strategies, but nothing seems to change, and nothing in drug policy changes. I mean, effectively, other than medical cannabis, which, let's be real, hasn't really changed. I think you'll agree. I mean, it kind of looks like the government are doing something, but there's a huge opposition to medical cannabis, and there is in itself is another problem. The medical profession should be interested in this topic. It's medical cannabis, in other words, cannabis used for medical purposes, for illnesses and symptoms. And the medical profession are either not interested or are really trying to defeat the whole initiative. I think that sort of saddens me. I mean, it's a very polarizing argument, this, and I think we need to think of new ways of debating, to be honest with you, because I don't think it's getting us anywhere. You're either one side or you're the other side, and you've seen it on Twitter. Twitter can become a very, very ugly place. I mean, people don't seem to like, people disagreeing with their point of view. And then a lot of the, I don't know, you probably realize this yourself. A lot of the medics on Twitter who post stuff, they don't debate at all. They just post stuff. And then when they're questioned on any of the stuff they post, they don't answer. I mean, look, that's a prerogative not to answer, but I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can kind of put this stuff out there as almost fact, and then not debate the merits or otherwise of what you're posting. And that's one of the things I think we really need to get around is we could sit down here, me and you, cite all the studies that tell you recreational legalization and medical cannabis is brilliant. I'm kind of tired of doing that. Every time people post things, they'll post things to say that cannabis doesn't cause schizophrenia, or they'll post things to say cannabis does cause schizophrenia. They'll say that the experience in Canada and the USA for legalization is a disaster, or else the other side will post that it's brilliant. I'm kind of tired of it, really, to be quite honest with you. I'm struggling to maybe understand how we can affect change in this country, because in the end of the day, I actually think both sides actually want kind of the same thing. Nobody wants lots of people injured by cannabis. Nobody wants people injured by any kind of illicit drugs or drugs in general. But addiction and harms of drugs, and as you and I know, let's be straight about this, cannabis is way down the pecking order in terms of harms. But we want to make the drug safer. We want to be able to create educational opportunities. We want better research. As long as prohibition exists, we will not get any of those things.
No.
We will live in this sort of Nancy Reagan just say no environment of scaremongering, and we know it doesn't work. So I would like to see change in the way we debate, because I'm kind of tired of it. And this might come as a surprise to me, man. I'm kind of tired of my own side. Some of I end up arguing often more my own side than I do the other side. It's all, you're not liberal enough or something. It's there are always holes in people's arguments.
Of course.
Acknowledge what your holes are. It's not perfect. I mean, one of the problems in the States, and Canada's probably the best example, is that I've often heard the opposition, if you want to call it, say that legalization hasn't worked, right? So the obvious way legalization hasn't worked is it's made it more available, cannabis, and more people are coming to harm, and more young people are getting mental health problems. But actually, they're now using the argument that I don't understand this. They keep saying now that the illicit market is still there. Now, I thought they liked the illicit market. So I'm kind of confused. Yes, they're right in what they're saying. The reason the illicit market is still there is because the legal market has become very commercial. And when it becomes commercial, they can hike up prices. And if you hike up prices, because this may happen with minimum unit pricing in alcohol, people are going to go to the market that sells the cheapest cannabis. And if they know they can get it reliably or grow their own or do whatever they want to do, they'll get it illegal. So you're not going to get rid of the illegal market. In order to get rid of the illegal market in cannabis, and that's just cannabis we're talking about, you would have to make cannabis very, very affordable, very available, and not worth your while going to get it illegally or even growing it yourself. Because if you're growing it yourself, you could still maybe break the law, if you know what I mean, because you wouldn't have a license to do so. Then the question is, should people be allowed to grow their own? Of course they should. You and I know that. But we're miles off in this country. We can't even get really medical cannabis over the line, which to me is the most non-contentious part of cannabis. You couldn't get more non-contentious. Medical cannabis is extremely safe. And I've always said the worst thing that can happen with medical cannabis is it doesn't work.
Yeah, you're
That's the
not
worst
wrong
thing I
there.
think that can happen. It doesn't cause any problems. But of course, the opposition will say, they'll always conflate these things and say, all the harms coincided with more liberal medical cannabis use. The devil's in the detail. That's just not true. That's nothing to do with medical cannabis, and you know that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the prohibition creates a lot more problems than it solves. I don't think it solves any real problems, to be very honest. But one problem that I do see cropping up because of this prohibition and because of the lack of action on the issue of medical cannabis is now people are using cannabis illegally and not engaging in conversations with their doctors. There's people who are engaging in conversations with their doctors, but they might as well be hitting their head off the wall. One person in the audience there, John Finnegan, he sent in a question there kind of asking, did you to see a day where he'd be able to get prescribed medical cannabis off his doctor, as currently he's been prescribed. And he mentions a drug here, and he says the withdrawals from this particular drug that he mentions are absolutely atrocious, and he's been using cannabis illegally now, but he can't get access to it through his doctor. So he's just kind of wondering, do you see the day where cannabis will be able to be prescribed by a doctor, or do you think that we're going to be forever running around in circles, just chasing our tails on this issue?
I don't think we will be forever doing this, but it is bloody painfully slow, and John shouldn't be in that position at all. I have a very straightforward view on medical conditions and treatments for those medical conditions. When we treat medical conditions as doctors, we use treatments with the best available evidence for treatment of those conditions. The only problem is that sometimes there are conditions that are quite treatment resistant, and this is where medical cannabis really can come in. I don't think we should get rid of all the pre-existing kind of medications and then replace them with medical cannabis. That's not what's going on here. What's going on with pretty much every single person who's tried cannabis or a medical condition has exhausted their avenues conventionally. So that to me is like a human rights issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can we get it so wrong in this country? Why can we not make this available to people? Why are doctors so obtuse about the benefits? A lot of them don't really want to read anything. They don't want to consider. They've made their mind up before reading anything. And I mean that. There's a lot of doctors that just, and I know why that is. It's the history of cannabis. That's what the problem is here. It's the history and the stigma. Never mind the users. The drug itself is stigmatized. It's demonized. And as a result of being demonized, there are a lot of doctors that cannot accept for 1 minute that a drug, and it's quite interesting because you probably know where this is going in a minute. They can't understand that a drug that is largely used for recreational and illicit purpose could be of medical benefit. Now, therein lies a problem, because they have no problem with morphine, which is pretty much the same thing as heroin.
Yep.
So why is morphine sulfate, which is used in hospitals if you break your ankle and you need acute pain relief, why is that so absolutely accepted? And yet heroin is incredibly demonized. I've been treating heroin use for the guts 25 years, and yet cannabis, they can't make that jump. I don't know what it is. It's a cultural thing in Ireland, I think, as much as anything else. We're very kind of strange in Ireland in terms of change. We don't like other countries telling us what to do, and we don't like change. And the medical profession we may as well just get it out there. It's very conservative.
Very much so.
And most people who are doctors really are in their own little silo, doing their own little thing. They're not really that interested in this. Now that's part of the problem, is they're not interested. I thought they might be with medical cannabis. And I'm sure there are others out there. I've no doubt there are other doctors out there. I know this is a long-winded way of answering John's question, but there's a lot of doctors out there, I think, that are quite willing to be involved with medical cannabis, but they're afraid.
Yeah,
There's fear.
I've met people over the years who've said that their doctor has said, yeah, continue using your cannabis, but I can't work with you with it. But, I'm glad it's working with you, and keep me up to date. The doctors are happy to engage in like some kind of under the table discussions, I suppose, if you will, but they can't work with them at the forefront, which is a big problem for doctors, because they're your frontline defense when it comes to your health. And if you're using something behind their backs, then they're not able to do the fullest of their job. They're not able to look after you to the best of their abilities. So that's going to have knock-on consequences there again afterwards. It's a big problem. And John's not alone in this. There's so many people out there right now who are using these substances, and then there's other substances as well, but we won't even get into them, the psychedelics and stuff like that there as well. There's certainly people looking into that. But I'd like to just go back to something you said earlier, Garrett, around just the work that you do. You were talking about in the earlier days that yourself and Cahill was teaching you how to do it wrong. What was it that you were doing wrong, and when was it that the light went off and kind of said, "Oh no, this is the way to go"?
Very good question. I'll tell you when the light, and it did go off. You're absolutely right. It's a great question because there's a story behind this. So I was doing it wrong for a few years. We were punishing basically heroin users. We were doing a lot of urine testing. We were just not really kind of using that medication according to the best available evidence. Cahill did a master's in Trinity College Dublin, and it was a brilliant master's. It was in drug and alcohol policy, and it was run by a chap called Shane Butler. Shane really was well ahead of his time in terms of drug policy. And what happened was Cahill signed up to the master's, I think, in the late 90s. So I would have been maybe, a year and a half into kind of doing it, and I think he completed it. It was a 2-year course. And when he was in the course of doing that, the internet kind of was coming, like information on the internet was much more available in the kind of, around the early 2000s. Cahill rang me one day. It was almost like a light bulb moment. He said, he was almost, "Stop what you're doing." And it was like JF came in. He says, "Garrett, I've been really kind of studying this thing in my master's. We're doing it all wrong. We're punishing people. We're throwing them off programs. We're really all over the place." And I said, that couldn't be right, Cahill. I was kind of questioning him. I was sort of, these are doctors, like they've more experience than I do. I wasn't in it long at that stage. And he says, "Garrett, I have some stuff. Do you use the internet?" And I said, "Yeah, I've started to use it." He said, I'll send you some stuff. And then he sent me some stuff. And it was compelling, how wrong we were doing it. And then over the next kind of few years, I began to change. Now, I got into a lot of bother with this. There was a lot of acrimony where people just didn't like change. They wanted to continue punishing, and I didn't, and I stood up to it. And I paid a personal price for that. It was a lot of acrimony and work. I won't get into it, but it was fairly ugly. But it was the best fight I ever had, because we the end of that fight, we got the change we needed. There was just more recognition. I still think the training of doctors in addiction treatment is still lacking, to say the least. But we don't do the punishment thing. I mean, old habits die hard. I'm sure there's some pockets of it going on around the place, but we did change. And this is interesting because, going back to John's thing, do you see a time? I see a time in this country when cannabis will be legal. Now, and then, by virtue of association there, I mean, the medical cannabis is a no-brainer. I mean, that'll arrive first. There's no question about it. That'll be much more available. I think what will happen is we need something to change, Martin. But I think what we need to do is, I go back to my earlier point. I think we need to stop pulling lumps out of each other. It's very tempting. I know when you look on Twitter and you see an article and you know that it's questionable, and it's very anti-cannabis. It is very tempting to go in and just lay the boot out. And Twitter is kind of difficult anyway, because you don't get an awful lot of characters to be able to write things down and respond. So, the debate potential in there is probably not great, and it's usually very reactive anyway. But I think what will happen is, I think if we can get a better debate going and bring people along, I think what will happen is we will start to see change. And what happens with change is, when change happens and there are some positive benefits out of change and the sky doesn't fall in, it gives people confidence. So I'd like to see in my own profession a little bit more of an open-minded view that, because there are doctors right throughout this country have patients who, despite all the medical treatments that are out there, they're not getting better. And they must in their mind be thinking, shit, I'm hearing stuff about medical cannabis being able to treat epilepsy and pain, and might there be something in this? And like everything with doctors, we're no different than anyone else. When you start using something to make things better and it starts to work, you get more confidence in it. This happens all the time. You know, I prescribe a drug called antabuse for alcohol abuse, and I went through a large part of my earlier career thinking that antabuse was a bad idea. It's a drug basically makes you sick if you drink. And I thought, no, no, that's terrible. How could you do that? You couldn't make somebody sick. No, no, no. And then I had a consultant in a hospital who had a patient who was a friend of mine, the consultant, and they were discharging a patient. And they said, look, there's a patient here, very motivated, really doesn't want to drink, but just needs an outpatient kind of approach. Would you be able to prescribe this drug? And I said, just give it a try and see. Such was my experience with this drug and the thing that I changed completely. Why? Because I realized that a lot of my fears about that drug just weren't real. You know, so I recognized to myself that I was probably wrong. I was probably conservative in relation to drug, and I changed. And you know, it's like when, you know, one of the things I don't like on Twitter is where somebody changes their tune and goes the other way. You know, somebody might be radically prohibitionist and they change the other way, and people start putting up photos of them or articles that they, you know, you've changed your tune. I welcome anyone to change their tune, and they're always welcome into my world in terms of, you know, legalization and regulation. Is this, I don't care what scraps we've had in the past. If people say, you know what, I've evaluated this and I'm changing my mind on it, I absolutely embrace them. A lot of our group in our camp, Martin, don't do that. They you know, they think, oh, you know, you did this for so long, we shouldn't do that. We should embrace people who change their minds. It's not a crime to change your mind, remember.
Yeah, I'd say that there's a lot of this kind of once the enemy, always the enemy. I think within our community, people not willing to forgive people for their discretions in the past. But like you said, I think, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. You know, the likes of some of these staunch prohibitionists currently, I think it's coming from a good place. You know, it's within their heart that they think that they're doing the right thing. I don't think these people are bought off by any industries and stuff like that, and they're knowingly peddling misinformation. I think the ignorance is just there, that they think that what they're doing is right, and they haven't been able to see over the wall to see the arguments from the other side, whether it be from a lack of trying or just that they're so committed to their own position that they're unable to do it. But I don't think any of them are doing it from, you know, oh, I want your life to be difficult, I want your life to be bad. It's more they want to improve society. And they think that prohibition, abstinism, is the way. But yeah, it's a difficult job we have to get them to see over that wall. But we have to try and help these people rather than seeing them as our enemies. They're people we need to help and assist, because they're just kind of, as I say, they're not able to see over the wall. Just give them a little boost.
Yeah, and some of the abuse that they receive on Twitter, I wish people wouldn't tag me in when they start abusing people who have a different point of view than me, because I'm not going to buy into any of that. You know, they're called pharmaceutical shills. They're called, you know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to get into it. I just don't buy into it. I'm heartened to hear you say that, Martin. I agree with you. I think they kind of firmly believe in their point of view. I think one of the reasons that a lot of people believe in their point of view is because they're very, very fixed on the idea that maybe if you legalize a drug, you make it more widespread. And, you know, you'll have seen some of the stuff I tweet. And I am a bit repetitive in this, but I am struck by how the people who are very prohibitionist, so they think prohibition is the right way to go, how quiet they are on prohibition and the harms of prohibition. They never seem to say anything about prohibition. I'm quite willing to talk about the faults of legalization. No problem whatsoever. Absolutely no problem. I'd sit down, and if somebody says, you know, these are the things, I'll go along with that, and I'll you know, accept there are holes. But I don't know if you noticed this, but prohibitionists never talk about the harms of prohibition. It's very strange. Never. I don't know one of them. We have a number of people on Twitter, some of them very, very kind of, you know, lots of followers. Nothing on prohibition. And when you put it out there and say, what do you make of the harms of prohibition? I mean, nothing. No response whatsoever. And this is what really kind of I find very, very puzzling. That it's very strange in Ireland, because we don't have legalization or regulation in Ireland. We don't, right? No. And yet, all the abuse that people who use cannabis get, and all the negative kind of misinformation, you would think it's legalized. You know, if it's such a problem drug that a lot of these people are saying, surely we need to change the status quo And it sounds to me like, so for instance, I don't fight the schizophrenia thing anymore. It's pointless. It's just a stupid argument to go down. If it does cause schizophrenia, I don't think it does. But if it does, why don't we bloody regulate it and study it and see what's going on?
There we
What the fuck's
go.
going on? Why are we debating that? Every time I hear, I don't know if you noticed this, there was an article, a letter that went up from some MP in the UK the other day who's vehemently against even just decriminalising
That's right.
cannabis. And they went straight in. They all start off with cannabis has a great toll on mental health and particularly young people. Why do they always associate the mental health and the problems with cannabis with legalization? We don't have legalization.
Yeah.
Stop going on about legalization's fault. How can that be? We don't have it. It's they don't consider, for instance, that maybe prohibition might be contributing to some of these problems, or indeed might be causing some of these problems. But that's just not considered. And I really question people every time they say that. I do take them up on it. They say, I disagree with your point of view. Cannabis is a very dangerous drug. And I say straight away, well, if it's dangerous, why don't we regulate it? You know, we regulate alcohol, we regulate tobacco. Why? Because I think we'll agree that if we didn't regulate alcohol and tobacco, the harms would increase. But we don't have that view with cannabis and indeed other illicit drugs like cocaine and heroin.
Oh, 100%. The harms would skyrocket. Like, I remember a time with tobacco, I was able to go down to the shop and buy a packet of cigarettes for my mum. But because of proper regulations now, I can no longer do that. They put an age limit in place, which is great. When I was 12, I was able to go in, and I think that it became a point when I needed to bring a letter with me. If I had a letter from my mum, I would still be able to get served them. But then the law actually really changed, and it was like, no, you cannot sell cigarettes to under 18-year-olds, which was great. And we seen then there was an improvement. And we can look at the data there for this, and we will see a shift from young people smoking to more and more young people not smoking, which is great. It shows regulation and education, these things work. We can also look at that with alcohol as well. Education and regulation have worked. We look at the younger population now. Binge drinking, while it's still a problem, I'm not saying it's gone, it's less of a problem than it was 10 years ago and even 20 years ago, because people are better educated, and that's where we need to be bringing the situation with other drugs, especially cannabis. I done a little protest in the city here last month. I gave out free brownies on the birthday of an amazing activist by the name of Mary Rapun. And when I was there saying my little piece, there was many young people around, and these young people, they thought I was giving out cannabis brownies. Now, I had cannabis brownies there, but I was only going to give them to people who I knew they were of age. So I just gave these kids normal brownies. But it was there, the young people that were interested, and I said my piece afterwards, was like, with regulations, those young people can be protected, because if I was some other person, I would have been freely able to give them the cannabis products, and there's no regulations there to protect these kids at all. So it's a very big problem, the lack of regulation and the lack of education. And because in school, and I'm sure you're probably well aware of the education that goes on in schools, it's the just say no approach. Like, we're only ever focusing in on the harms, and when you've got young people and they might have watched, like, say, Cheech and Chong or Pineapple Express or some of these other movies which kind of show the fun side of recreational drug use, if you will, then you've an educator, they're like, oh no, drugs are only bad, they're only bad. You lose the opportunity to really engage with those people, because they know you're lying to them. So it's very much harmful. And again, you go back to the prohibitionist mindset. If they really want, if in the deep down in their heart, and they want to help people in society and make it safer for them, they really need to not open their heart, but open their mind and to listen to what it is that we're saying. Because we're all looking for the same thing. I think that's something that we really need to focus in on. We are all really looking for the same thing. We want a safer and better society. So I really think that's something that we need to be focusing in on, and trying to find that little nugget that we can all kind of, we agree on this, let's work together on this, the prohibitionists, the anti-prohibitionists, and better society going forward.
I completely agree with you, Martin. And it is interesting. You just had me thinking about something. I mean, they just say now in the schools education, I mean, worldwide, it's just failed. And the reason it's failed is because we have made the assumption that we know better than the kids. We don't know better than the kids. We think we know better than the kids. We never seem to ask the kids for their opinion, and we seem to discourage honesty from kids. So what do kids do, or what does anybody do when they're in fear of a bad reaction from telling the truth? They lie and they hide it. And there's no doubt about it that I have patients who young patients who are no longer with us anymore because of that very thing, the fear of discovery by their family because of the stigma. The other issue I would say to you is it is interesting about the regulation thing. There's no doubt we probably we're trying to get the whole thing around. I know it's very contentious, the whole minimum unit pricing, the regulation around alcohol. It's not just about the regulation of alcohol. We do have a real problem. We're very like the UK in that regard. There are a number of other countries that are way up there in the league table of drinkers. We do have a cultural thing as much as a regulatory problem with alcohol in this country that we've never really got a hand on. We're very flippant about alcohol. It's a very, very harmful drug. It won't surprise you how much alcohol I treat in the course of my career. It's so ugly. I mean, I somebody said to me, "What's the worst drug that you treat?" Well, I always say, funny enough, I answer that, and I'm not being facetious here. The worst drug is the drug that causes you the problem. So if it's cannabis, then for you, that's the worst drug. But in terms of like for like, and I know David Nutt has done, a great seminal study on looking at the harms of all the different drugs, taking into account of all the different harms both to the person and to society. Cannabis, obviously, surprise, surprise, is well down the list.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol is very, very high up the list. And alcohol, one of the reasons alcohol is high up the list is it's a very toxic drug in the sense that it's quite water soluble. So it gets into every pore in your body. There are very few drugs that get into every pore of your body. And very, very few drugs, sorry about that dog barking there, that get in like alcohol does. And it's very, very toxic to kind of nearly every drug system. Now, the point I was going to make was that you just reminded me of was that, and I go back to the point I made earlier, was, the way people are saying that in the USA and in Canada, there's still a thriving black market. And when I'm questioning anyone who says that, I say, well, that's very interesting information if it's true, if there's still a thriving, and I think it is true. I think there still is a thriving black market. But what that tells you is not that legalization doesn't work, but that the regulation is less than ideal. So what should you be doing there? You should be tailoring the regulation to minimize as much as you can the illegal market. Mm-hmm. You don't go, well, it doesn't work, legalization, so let's just scrap it and go back to prohibition. So if, you can't have it both ways. I've put this to people who are prohibitionists. Do you want prohibition or do you not want prohibition? Because you seem to be critical of prohibition by saying that legalization isn't snuffing out prohibition. It's never going to snuff out prohibition. And in any case, we're only talking about cannabis here. A huge number of drugs now that are on the black market, including pharmaceutical drugs on the black market. Yep. So this idea that cannabis legalization will solve all the world's problems and we'll have no drug dealers anymore is laughable. Mm-hmm. But certainly in relation to cannabis, I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that's coming out of the USA, one of the areas that definitely is true is it has put a dent in the illegal market. There's no question about that. It's put a dent in it. The illegal market is not thriving the way it has before, but it needs a bigger dent in it. I think you'll agree on that. It needs a bigger dent so that people can go into a shop at a reasonable price, buy cannabis, not be in fear of the law. I mean, one of the interesting facts to come out of Canada, I just read a statistic there the other day, that in Canada, in 2018, just before cannabis was legalized, there were little over 26,000 people with a criminal record for possession of cannabis. That number, when cannabis was legalized, was I don't know, 100 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's incredible if you think of the amount of money spent on the 26,000 versus maybe a couple of hundred or whatever it is.
Yep.
That's amazing. What a benefit. And this other thing, by the way, I'm kind of sick of listening to this thing, is the commercialization of cannabis. Well, with all due respect, what do you expect people to do? Nobody's going to do this for nothing. You don't expect the vintners and they're creating jobs. They're trying to make a living for themselves. What's this idea that, you have to be altruistic and you can't make any money out of cannabis? What world are they living in? These are the same people, often doctors, who themselves are making a great living out of the misery of drug addiction, including myself. This idea that making money is bad. What's that all about?
Yeah, I know it's a backwards way of thinking, and I think it comes from the idea that, oh, you're making the money off of the back of people's misery and suffering, because nobody can use a drug and enjoy their life. You know, those people out drinking in the pub, sure, that's misery and suffering that they're going through. You shouldn't be able to make money off of that. It's a backwards way of thinking, and it's coming completely from this kind of prohibitionist mindset then as well, that all drug use is bad and therefore should be avoided. But it's not the case at all, really. And on drug addiction, Garrett, like, how do you define drug addiction? How would you define it?
Well, it's kind of difficult in many ways, because there are words that spawn from addiction that I hate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind the word drug addiction. Like, if you want to say, there are definitions of drug addiction, and I kind of look at drug addiction as kind of dependence with consequences, where I don't look at dependence necessarily with consequences. So an example would be, if you're someone with a terrible cocaine dependence, they've got consequences. They're losing their job, they're getting in trouble with the law, their relationships are suffering, and their physical and mental health is suffering. You then say somebody who is using, say, morphine for pain, they're physically dependent, but they don't have addiction. So I kind of look at the distinction. So, addiction is kind of a repetitive use of a drug that causes biopsychosocial consequences in one's life. But I have to say, the one thing that definitely is the hallmark of addiction is consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So you often get this idea that, we're seeing this now with electronic cigarettes. People say people are addicted to electronic cigarettes. Well, I kind of say, well, what's the consequences?
Yeah.
What's this idea of addicted?
Mm-hmm.
If you use your smartphone every day and it's not causing you any problem at all, and you get all your information from your smartphone, you spend a lot of time on your smartphone, but it's not impinging on your work, and we all use our smartphones too much. I don't think you're only addicted to your smartphone if you're looking on your smartphone, not going to work and not doing anything else. Like the same with Xbox, there has to be consequences that come with this dependence. So it's a funny sort of word, addiction, I suppose, in many ways. I don't like the word addict.
Mm-hmm.
Hate it. I hate the word, the J word, obviously. I really hate these stigmatizing terms. I kind of, if somebody has a problem with drugs, the one I like, and it's not very scientific, is problematic alcohol use or problematic drug use, because it kind of defines something. It says that their drug use is causing problems in their life. I have no problem with that. I don't think there's anything particularly stigmatizing with that. I think we do need to get the language right. And I know it's clumsy, and I don't mind people being clumsy. There's a lot of people who don't know any different, and they're not really au fait with this, and they use the word addict. And I try and explain to them it's a kind of a stigmatizing term. They're people.
Yeah.
They're not addicts. They're people. They just develop problems.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. That kind of a definition as well is when somebody's overusing something to a point where it has a negative consequence within their life, whether it be a breakdown of social circles, family, friends, jobs, things like that. That's definitely kind of how I would see an addiction as well. Because like that, I would drink coffee, say, every morning. You could say I'm addicted to it, but it's having no negative consequences in my life. It's actually adding a positive benefit to my life, because it makes me a bit more perky in the morning, a bit more the neurons are firing a bit more effectively. And I would see cannabis in that same light. I was definitely say that I was a person going back many years ago who didn't engage with his thoughts at all in any meaningful way. But I found that when I used cannabis at that early age of 15, that it slowed me down to the point where I was actually able to engage with my thoughts. And for that positive reason, I kept coming back to cannabis then, is because it was imparting a positive effect on my life, and it wasn't a negative effect. It wasn't negative until I got caught with it, which I'm sure you would agree with that as well, that you've seen that in your own practice, people coming like, oh, I've got a cannabis problem, but you find out they've actually just got a illegal problem.
I couldn't tell you how many times that's happened.
Oh, jeez.
It's just incredible, really. And that really is the part that saddens me the most. I mean, one of the things that really annoys me about cannabis laws is that the people who are very prohibitionist, they never, I said they don't talk about prohibition, but they also don't talk about the many, 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 many people far more use cannabis and have no problem with it than have a problem. And we don't talk about those. Like, for instance, you're not allowed to talk about the pleasure of cannabis. I mean, that's terrible. I mean, God forbid people could actually find cannabis pleasurable.
Mhm.
So, we tend to create extremist views. You and I don't, because we see this kind of rationally, but these extremist views on a minority of people, and an otherwise undefined minority of people. Because how many times do you see stories on I call them unverifiable anecdotes. So it's a whole big article about per John in his life was ruined from an early age because he became schizophrenic. I mean, nobody knows how much of this is true. Nobody knows the finer detail of John's life. Nobody knows all the risk factors that might have led to some of the things. And there could be a lot of facts in there that are not facts at all.
Mhm.
But yet they're very powerful. And yet you could get a study that is a really good and well done study on the benefits of cannabis and the lack of harm of cannabis, and that gets buried. Doesn't have the same impact at all. I think that's part of that debate that I find sort of unsavory. Quite honest with you, is the irony of it is the opposing view kind of attacks the evidence in favor of cannabis, but they highlight the evidence. They cherry pick the evidence that supports their argument. The cannabis side is also doing this. I'm trying to get away from doing this. This idea of putting a study up that kind of, reaffirms and consolidates your view is just pointless now at this stage, because every study you pick, you can find any amount of studies that would support your point of view. It's not the point.
Mhm.
The point is that you cannot argue. It's absolutely irrefutable that prohibition has caused huge amount of harm and a huge amount of death and a huge amount of cost. Now, nobody's going to tell me otherwise.
Yeah.
You're not going to convince me. You will never convince me. As long as I have blood running through my veins and air running through my lungs, I will never change my view on that. You are never going to convince me ever, 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 ever that prohibition is beneficial to individuals or the wider society. Never. And so you might say, am I very fixed on that view? I am, but you have to remember, like yourself, man, I've read a lot about this.
Mhm.
I've been at this now for a long, long time. I don't arrive at that. I mean, one of the things that really kind of is bugbear of mine is people who lazily enter the debate, who really don't know what they're talking about, and they come out with some kind of nonsense as if they're an authority on this, and then when you hit them with the goods, they head for the hills.
Yeah.
It's not helpful. I mean, I would say to anybody, if there's a message to come out of this, I would say, if you're going to get involved in a debate about drug policy or a debate about anything in life, inform yourself. It's called educating yourself. Don't come to the table having read an article from The Guardian and then just taking that as absolute fact, to talk about how evil cannabis is.
Yeah.
Educate yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely, and don't be so cemented in your position then either as well. Always be open to the kind of like you are yourself. You talk about it, as fixed as you are to supporting the end of prohibition. It's like you acknowledge the problems that are potentially going to come with that. It's not this like fucking panacea that it's going to solve every problem that was out there. It's like no, this is going to solve a lot of problems, but it's going to bring with it some of its own problems. But those are not as bad as the problems of prohibition. And that's where we need to get the prohibitionists into that conversation. I think that's how we're going to have a proper, healthy debate, is when both sides start acknowledging, the problems that exist there. And let's find the centre ground where we can lie, because I'm not calling for all drugs to be legalised and for drugs to be sold in every corner. It's like, no, we want control and regulation. We want a safe environment, safe for the people who use drugs, but also safe for the people who don't use drugs as well. And we can't do that until we start heading away from this prohibition period. But
one of the things that does I find kind of disturbing in some ways is that you just know that if we do anything like make cannabis more available, perhaps, or more legal or more regulated, the sad thing is that there are groups of people out there who want to find fault in that. You have to question people's motivations in that sense. Like, if I would love someone to say, I'm very, very much into prohibition, and then there's a vote, there's a citizen assembly, and then following from that, there's a change in the law, and the 77 Drugs Act is changed and amended, and suddenly now cannabis is regulated like it is in the States. And you have people who want to find fault in that. They want to. They'll get onto Twitter and I told you so. And you kind of start saying to yourself, why do you want to find fault in it? I'd have more respect for you if you accepted what the benefits of these things are. I mean, we don't know yet what those benefits are, but we know from the US and from Canada, and Uruguay, and from other jurisdictions, the sky certainly hasn't fallen in because there has been legalization. I think the general feeling in those countries is they're getting on with their life. But I can tell you one thing, there is no question, even if you just put it down to cost and revenue been generated and lack of revenue been lost and taxation and all that type of palaver, there is no question, Martin, that legalization has been an absolute success. And well, even that statistic, I thought about 25,000 versus 100 or whatever it is, that's massive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of the amount of legal time or time spent in the legal system.
A lot.
I mean, when I wrote an article recently in the journal, I talked about that, about a guy I treated and the amount of money. I don't know what right down to the cents that was spent on it. But if that person wasn't arrested, there'd be no cost associated with the arrest.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of money to be saved. And
Massive.
that's the part that does kind of puzzle me a little bit, Martin, in terms of how have the government not cottoned onto this? Money is call of the day. The economy is the big ticket in this country.
Yeah.
What the hell's going on? Ming did, a little, it was more of a little straw kind of poll-y type thing about trying to assess how much could be generated. It's a lot of money.
It's a whole lot of
Hell
money.
of a lot of money.
Yeah, I believe if memory serves correct, that event that you talked about that yourself and Luke Flanagan were at back in Galway, that was the Students for Sensible Drug Policies national conference at the time. But I don't know if you can remember, we had a big, huge banner at the top of the room, and it was 250,000 drug users treated by the Gardaí. But again, like me and you know, that the Gardaí are not qualified to treat drug users. That's not their position at all. And again, I think it's a very sad state of affairs. What went on there on Wednesday above in Dublin, a lady sadly losing her life. And you have to wonder, and the Gardaí are out there focusing on drug users who aren't there. That's not their place to be focusing on. You have to wonder, what's that doing to our streets and the effectiveness of the policing that goes on out there. Whatever about the health system and stuff like that. We just look at the justice system and the effect Prohibition has on that. Like, if you've got 250,000 drug users treated by the Gardaí, that's 250,000 people taking up the time of the Gardaí who should never have been taking it up in the first place, therefore deferring the Gardaí away from real crimes, real criminals. So it's a sickening problem created by this Prohibition. It's much larger than just the problems created for drug users. There's the problems created for society at large, the people out there who don't use drugs too. And
I couldn't agree with you more, Martin. I mean, the awful events in Tullamore, I mean, everybody is struck by that. And I don't envy the task of the Gardaí. And I know, a lot of people sometimes have it in for the Gardaí, but I couldn't agree with you more. The Gardaí should be there to deal with real crime. And by God, there's no more real crime than what happened last Wednesday in Tullamore. It's absolutely shocked the nation. And as I think Micheál Martin said, they're going to put all the resources required to get the perpetrator of that crime. It is amazing to think the amount of money that's spent on not just cannabis-related crime, but just crimes. I mean, I'm dealing with this a lot in my own clinical practice and treating people who are in courts and stuff over possession charges and stuff like that. What a waste of bloody time. Why don't we draw a line under this now at this stage?
yeah,
And we don't have to do it all overnight. If we're going to do these things, why don't we do the easy stuff? Why don't we make medical cannabis as available as it needs to be? Stop this rubbish if it has to be a consultant and all that nonsense. Have training programs for doctors. There's lots of people abroad. I know them who would be willing to come over here and do, training seminars for doctors that would like to upskill. And why, at the drop, why are we criminal? Why even just simple for personal use? Why are we still doing this? Why are we still doing this? Why are we criminalizing people, catching them with drugs?
Oh, I lost you there again, Garrett.
Sorry, yeah. Can
good.
you hear me?
Yeah, back again.
Yeah. We all know that the drug-related offences in the US are disproportionately aimed at black people and at poor people. You know, and you're talking about communities that just can scarcely kind of deal with, kind of put one foot in front of the other in terms of, you know, poverty and social marginalization. And here they are now, an added layer of more of kind of more hassle and more grief for them and life-changing stuff. Why are we continuing to do this? So medical cannabis should be very, very easily available, and decriminalization should be implemented ASAP. What's the big deal about those two? Get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
You know, what's that? You know, I mean, I mean, we could be talking about this all day, but I mean, if you think about the Minority Report from Justice Sheehan in relation to, it just goes to show you how deeply entrenched some people's views are. You know, they're quite willing to put a group together and decide that they don't want to listen to evidence.
Yeah.
You know, Justice Sheehan just said, I think it would be a sad day for Ireland, or something. I can't remember exactly the words. If we were to decriminalise drugs, I'd be against that approach.
Yeah.
And you go, well, why?
Yeah.
Why? Because that's his personal belief, Martin. That's why. I mean, anybody who comes to the table, I'm sick of listening to anecdotes. If an anecdote is the reason for your opinion, well, then I'm sorry, your opinion doesn't count. You know, I need something stronger than that. We're talking about something very, very, very important in this country. You know, it brings me on to the other thing about the Citizens Assembly. I'm looking forward to that. I hope there is change. And going back even further to a comment you made earlier about young people. Young people are the future of this country, and the young people are not buying. You know, you went on. You talked about Sean and Graham and Galway back in the day.
Yeah.
Back in my day, which would have been the 80s and the early 90s in college, there was nothing like that. There was a lot of drug use in college, but there was certainly no awareness in that way. So I honestly believe that the young people of today are not buying the nonsense that we did in previous generations. That has flown, and this is where change will happen, because those politicians in there, the old guard, they're going to be replaced, and they're going to get diluted out.
Yep.
So it is going to change. It's just, it is painfully slow. That's the only problem.
Yeah. But I think that's already even been reflected in, like, the Fine Gael Ógra and the Fine Gael Ógra. Like, they're younger groups. They're already voting in policies and supporting the idea of decriminalisation, legalisation, much more progressive than as you say, the old guard. So definitely, I think, like, in time to come, we will see a transition there. But sadly, it's a painfully slow path that we're walking down.
It is, and there's one thing we didn't talk about. I just want to briefly talk about it, and that is cannabis and driving.
Yes.
This is another thing now, another injustice, another stigma, and another far-reaching consequences. This idea of being roadside tested positive for cannabis. Now, I don't have to tell you that the link between a cannabis showing up in your system and you being impaired for cannabis is just not there. And if there's one law I would like changed ASAP, and I'd say with a lot of other drugs, alcohol testing is different, because blood alcohol concentrations are fairly reliable in terms of behaviors and in terms of your ability to do things. So alcohol I've no problem with, and they've probably got it right with alcohol, no problem with that. But they've got it absolutely wrong with other drugs. And I've seen people now, you know, the courts are now getting challenged, these decisions. But they ran with this, and it is a faulty. We need to do proper roadside sobriety testing if we're going to do it. But we need guards to be skilled. I don't want people on the roads who are impaired and can't drive a car, right? And I've no doubt that there are people impaired, both whether it's alcohol or drugs, on the road, where you never get to see the finer detail of accidents. There's no doubt about it. You need to have your wits about you. But I think it's tragic to think there are people who, you know, take cannabis, you know, the day before, 2 days before, a week before, perhaps even longer, and they're getting scrutinized in this way. It's absolutely appalling.
It is, and what's even more horrible, then we have superintendents. There was a Limerick superintendent, the guard, who went on, he was on TV3 or one of those news shows anyway, but he was saying quite blatantly, if you smoke cannabis on a Wednesday, we will catch you. But even on a Sunday, he was saying, you know, he was acknowledging the fact that if you were to consume cannabis and if you drive even a few days after, we're still going to catch you. And he's just quite blatantly saying that, like, and I was just like, oh my God, I was gobsmacked. And it's just this no tolerance approach. And that's what that limit is. I think it's 1 nanogram of THC per milliliter of blood is what the limit is set at. In other places in the US, and while I don't agree with limits, they have it as high as like 5 and 10 nanograms per milliliter of blood. And actually, when the Irish were coming up with our limit, they were looking at a 2 nanogram per milliliter of blood, but what they found is that if they set it at 1 nanogram per milliliter of blood, they'll catch even more people. So they went for the lower limit for the idea of it being a much more of a deterrent from people to be driving after consuming. But it's not at all in line with road safety, the ethos of road safety. They're not putting these policies in place to make them more safer for us. It's putting them in place just so that we can target these people who consume cannabis, not because they're dangerous drivers, but simply because they've used cannabis, and it's wrong, it's backwards, and it's just it's inhumane what they're doing.
It is, and again, I go back to the point, like, it costs a lot of money.
Awful lot of money.
Costs a lot of resources.
Yeah.
You know, you have a guard who pulls somebody over. There's a process. That guard now is involved in a process that's completely and utterly based on little or no evidence. You're going to change somebody's life. If somebody needs their car to drive or work or even bring their kids to school or whatever it is, their life has been immeasurably changed, even though their ability to drive is A1.
Yeah.
That is really an injustice. And that needs to change straight away.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. Graham has sent in a question there, Garrett. He's asking, what's the best way, in your opinion, for a patient to talk to their GP about their cannabis use, I'd imagine, or possibly any other drug use?
Well, I suppose the problem is a lot of it depends on what your GP, how well disposed towards, drugs your GP is. Like, is the GP the best person to talk to? Well, it is if your GP has a track record of being able to refer you on appropriately or be able to reassure you that your drug use is not problematic and you're okay. But that requires education, that requires knowledge. I've no doubt that there are GPs out there with very, very little knowledge, giving very bogus advice to people, or sometimes maybe saying to them, look, I have no problem with this, but I don't know how to advise you. So
Yeah.
You have to remember, when you go to a GP, you're often thinking that you're getting very, very reliable information. But if the GP doesn't really kind of know the subject matter, you're in trouble.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer there. There was another question that came in as well, as to some of the claims that have been made by the prohibitionists. There's two pretty prominent ones that come to mind over there on Twitter. But how do these people get away with, spouting some of the misinformation that they do? Like, I seen one of them there recently shared a tweet from a news clipping, and it was like, I think that's what I said. I think cannabis 100% causes schizophrenia, something like that. It's like, or it may 100% cause schizophrenia. Like, how do these people get away with making these claims and not get pulled by the organisations, let's say, that they work for or get represented by?
Well, funny enough, I don't mind so much when people do that, because there's so many knowledgeable people out there that make them look like fools that I kind of encourage it, actually, if I'm honest. So when somebody comes out with something, the great thing about it is, if you notice on Twitter, I don't know if you notice this, it's very interesting when somebody comes out with nonsense, is that they very rarely get a round of applause from the following comments. Now, some of the comments are a little bit too close to the bone in terms of, being personalized. And I have no time for that. But a lot of them are not. A lot of them are just trying to tell them, no, this is not true, and maybe you need to rethink your position. So I don't mind them doing that. You're not going to be pulled by any authorities or people who work, because they don't care either. People who, hold their contract, or the regulator or whatever, not interested. And in fact, probably even worse than that, they probably believe that is true. So where do you where do you draw the line on this? I mean, it's a free world. You can say what you like. I don't think they do get away with it. You think they get away with it, but they actually don't. I mean, when I see anything with cannabis and schizophrenia on Twitter, 95% of the comments that follow, I would say as much as that, are usually refuting it. So in a way, don't be afraid of people writing crap thing. You've seen some of my tweets, and sometimes I can be a bit close to the gun and say drivel, one word, and then just move on. Absolute claptrap.
Mm-hmm.
And I've no problem debating with anyone if they want to think, but I've no problem. It depends on the mood you're in, I suppose, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, very much.
Sometimes I'm sick of going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There are certain people on Twitter that do like to debate, and they're very prohibitionist, and I don't go with them anymore. And I often say it even. It's just, no, you're not bringing me down that rabbit hole. Because if you're going to debate, I think you have to debate with a view to somebody saying something, like a proper debate.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, no, I have a different point of view on that, and this is my point of view. And then they say, well, I'd like to take you up on this, and that's your point of view. That's debating. That's not what's going on Twitter. You're not going to change their point of view, but is my point of view going to be changed? No, but I know what my holes are in my own argument
Mm-hmm.
about legalization. I don't think it's going to cure all the problem. And I have, absolutely concerns about, for instance, could you legalize not cannabis? That's a no-brainer, but something like cocaine. It's going to be a struggle. How would you do that? How would you, have commercial outlets that do it? You can't do it.
Yeah.
Cocaine's not a medical drug, so it's not like morphine or something like that, or heroin users where you can, it's good evidence that people who go in and get injected with heroin in a proper facility like
Very
Switzerland,
much so,
Australia,
yeah.
they do very, very well. You can't really do that with cocaine, so I do struggle to understand how that would operate.
Yeah.
But look, one of the things I think we really need to kind of start being is a bit more adventurous. Like I would say, for instance, about cannabis. Why don't we, rather than change the law necessarily on cannabis legalization, why don't we regulate it, have a start date and a finish date, and research the shit out of the findings?
Yep.
And at the end, and do not get someone in this country to do the research because they're all flawed. Get people abroad. Get really rigorously do the research to see whether it's beneficial. And if it is beneficial, then we move on.
Yeah, 100%.
That's better. I don't think we should be just changing the law willy-nilly, leaving it at that, because that's essentially what we've done with prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
We've left the law and decided that we're not reevaluating that. We're not nothing to see here. We're not open for business. We're not amending it.
Yeah.
Now, that's wrong. I wouldn't expect us to do that. You and I are pro-legalization and pro-regulation. I wouldn't expect them to do that. I would expect them to evaluate it. And if after the evaluation it's a disaster, there's people dying on the streets, like, with the fentanyl crisis or something like that, well, then we'd have to reevaluate that. We'd not necessarily to stop it, but we'd need to reevaluate to see where it's going wrong. So this is complicated. This is not simple. It's not like we legalize tomorrow and all our problems go away. But I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But with prohibitionists, they don't. They seem to be just focused on prohibiting without anything. The only thing they can come out with is, you make the drug less available, less people will use it. But I'm sorry, that's not the experience in Canada and in the USA. That's not what they're finding.
Yeah. But
so if that's not what they're finding, then why are we continuing to prohibit? Then what I usually say to people is, give me another. Okay, that's bogus. So have you got another one there? And of course they head for the hills.
Yeah, that's it.
They've nothing.
There's no real evidence.
So there's nothing to. No evidence. No.
There's no evidence to support the idea that prohibition actually makes drug availability reduce in any way at all. In fact, it just makes the drugs that are available much more dangerous when you do get your hands on them as a result of that. But to go back to what you mentioned about the cocaine situation, I would see cocaine in the same light as you would see caffeine from coffee. Like, people aren't out there like snorting caffeine, and they're not out there dropping. Well, there is people taking caffeine supplements, so I would be wrong on that one. But I would see cocaine in that same light, that if we were to decriminalise the coca leaf and offer people like access to that form of it, and also look, if cocaine was available, it's available, but a harm reduction approach would be, oh, here's this leaf, if you chew this leaf, or if you have a tea with this leaf, it would achieve the outcome of the desired outcome of the cocaine, but it'll be much less harmful to the end user. So that's one certain workaround. Because when we think of cocaine, it's a chemical, it's an extract, but we have to look at where does the cocaine come from. It comes from this leaf in much more natural form, and when you use it in that form, which it's been done for traditionally for millennia by the people over there in Peru and Colombia and stuff like that, it can be done safely and much less in a much less harmful manner to the end user. So again, cocaine, I think it's a product of prohibition. Without prohibition, we wouldn't have really have had cocaine, because if you look at cocaine where it was before Prohibition, it was in things like your Coca-Cola. It was in wines. They had wine. I can't remember the name of the wine, but it was a particular brand of wine, and it contained the cocaine, that alkaloid, and people consumed that, and it wasn't all that bad. It only ever became a problem then when you entered into Prohibition, when they started associating it with black people and jazz musicians and all of this other kind of nonsense that came with Prohibition afterwards. But I definitely do think that if we were to legalize the coca leaf, we could do a lot of positive things.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if you look at, say, going back to cannabis, I mean, when you look at Harry Anslinger and what he did in relation to cannabis, he didn't necessarily go after cannabis. He didn't like the people.
Yeah.
He didn't like the people who were using cannabis. He didn't like their culture. So he was racist.
Mm-hmm.
And he believed that the combination of black people and using cannabis became public enemy number one. We need to arrest them all, round them up, put them in prison, and eradicate this drug. Look what happened. Look what followed. Look at the amount of death and hardship and bloodshed just on his actions alone. I mean, that's like, we talk about war crimes, and I know people would say, oh, you're exaggerating. No, I'm not exaggerating. People have blood on their hands because of the way in which they've pursued people just for simply using a drug. And even if they weren't just using a drug, okay, so if they have a problem with a drug, do they need to be harassed? Nobody needs to be harassed, serving no function whatsoever. The other thing you see about all of this is that this is a very emotive subject. So, for instance, you'll often see, articles where somebody says they post something like, "Cannabis killed my son because he got very mentally ill, he got psychotic, and he ended up getting suicidal and he killed himself. It's an evil drug, it's an evil drug." And everyone channels into this, "Oh God, it's a terrible story, it's evil." But nobody asked the question for 1 second what the role of Prohibition had in that young lad's death. There's no devil in the detail stuff going on here. It's merely just this issue. Cannabis is evil, killed my son, we need to ban it. And that's one of the problems we have, is that you'll often see with prohibitionists more than people who are into sensible regulation, is that they're very, very angry about their position. They're very angry people about the fact that they feel these drugs are just evil and horrible. And sometimes it's an upbringing thing. I mean, you can understand what doctors, the vast majority of doctors, they weren't brought up on the margins. They were brought up in a fairly nurturing, in general, I'm talking generally speaking, middle class background. Some of them with families full of doctors, million miles far removed from, being harassed by the law because they use a drug.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there are a lot of middle class people who use, this one thing that struck me recently, I've seen in the UK, they're now kind of changing it and go, we're waging a war on the middle class drug users. They're the ones funding organized crime. Well, you're not going to get me on that one. It's easy to say, oh, I just want, the marginalized people and the people with social poverty. They're the only ones I care about. Yeah, that's not going to sway me. Nobody, get this, nobody needs to be harassed for using a psychoactive drug. I don't care whether you're a multimillionaire or you're a person who is homeless. I don't care what color your skin is, what your gender is, what your beliefs are. Nobody needs to be harassed for using a drug. End of story. That's the beginning and the end of it. But yet they're trying to do this now. They're trying to get people on side in another way. And it's the middle class, because they go, well, we might get more people on board here because there's a lot of people resentful of the middle classes. All you're doing is creating a war between classes there. It's just stupid.
Yeah, it's just compounding the problems of the situation, not making it better at all. Can I ask, in those situations, Garrett, where you find yourself in front of a person in your clinic who's only there because of the courts, do you ever say it back to the courts that I don't see a problem of addiction within this individual? Have you ever gone back and kind of been honest like that, or would you always kind of support that, oh, Johnny is making great efforts to kick the problem of cannabis?
Well, I've got to be a little bit careful because there's an end result here, and the end
Mhm.
result is to get him out of this criminal justice
Yeah.
kind of sphere. So it could be very tempting for me to just lay the boot into it and stuff like that. But I have said, in answer to your question, if somebody comes to me and I don't believe they have an addiction, yeah, I've said it.
Yeah.
I said the problem here is use. The only problem is they're very binary in it because they want urine testing. They want them
Mhm.
not to use it. And I'm kind of saying, well, don't we have a problem with this drug?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like we somebody in the audience here, Hunter K. He's been diagnosed with. He says he was diagnosed with ADHD and ODD when he was younger, and he was put on Ritalin as a result. But the Ritalin actually wasn't helping him at all, and he stopped using at 15 and started using cannabis as a result. Then afterwards. So if somebody like Hunter was there with you, and Hunter was like, "Well, look, if I stop using cannabis, I'm gonna my ADD and stuff like that, it's going to be much more problematic then."
yeah,
Like, how does somebody in that
I
situation deal with the urine test problem then?
yeah, I would move in for the kill there. I wouldn't
Okay.
spare the horses in that. Somebody's getting benefit from taking cannabis. It's a medical issue
Yeah.
anyway. And
Well, fair play
I
for
mean,
you
look,
on
there's
that.
crossover. There's a lot of people who think it's, and I know I can sometimes maybe get in the wrong side of cannabis activists, as they say. I don't like the way he's saying that medical cannabis and recreational cannabis are two different things. I
Hmm.
know they're not two different things in terms of cannabis, but they are two different things in sense of the indication for why you're taking them. And there's no doubt there's some people who take recreational cannabis but also find that it relieves pain, but they
Hmm.
get a buzz out of it, and that's fine. But I do separate the two things out because you have to remember who I'm dealing with a lot of the time. I am dealing with the law. I am dealing with other doctors. I am trying to bring people along and stuff like that. And like if somebody's using something for medical purposes, we need to say that's the reason they're using it. Now, I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean that I'm trying to kind of, to in some way demonize it. Oh, it would be terrible if they were getting some sort of buzz out of that. That's not the way I kind of play this. But I do think it is a bit nuanced. I mean, look, nobody would say, for example, that Vera's young daughter Ava is, taking that drug because she's getting some sort of buzz out of it
Hmm.
as well as getting medical benefit. It's clearly a medication in that case. So just call it a medication in
Yeah.
that case. That's not what's going on there with Ava or any other,
Clearly,
you
yeah.
know, child or even any other adult that is using it for medical purpose. Just say it's for medical purpose. I'm not trying to create a distinction here that's going to be against one or other view. Everybody knows my views at this stage. Legalize the bloody drug, lock, stock, and barrel. So I want to get that out there. I'm not trying to create any distinctions in that regard, but I do think there sometimes needs to be a distinction when it's been used for a specific purpose.
100%, yeah. I think to go back to something you said as well earlier is that while we're so far behind here in Ireland, our driving laws actually in relation to medical cannabis use, I would have to say that they're probably up there within the best in the world because we've actually legislated to allow for our Gardaí to carry out sobriety testing, so impairment testing at the side of the road when it comes to a person who's in legal possession of medical cannabis. They're a person who's got a ministerial license or they're under the medical cannabis access program. So a guard can use their discretion there then at the side of the road and kind of say whatever the test is, walk the line, say your ABCs backwards or something like that, even though I probably couldn't even do that sober. But we've actually, we're at we're much more progressive in that regards to our driving laws. And there was a study that was done with Sativex, and it was looking at multiple sclerosis patients. And what the study found actually looking at these multiple sclerosis patients is that the cannabis use took the patients from a condition where they were unable to drive a car to a number of weeks later they were able to drive the car. And the cannabis level, the cannabinoid level within their body, it didn't impair their ability to drive, it actually improved their ability to drive, because multiple sclerosis, it's a very debilitating condition, and because of the reduction in spasticity thanks to the cannabinoids, they were actually much more fit to drive the car. So there was no cognitive impairment, there was no impairment of their reaction speeds or anything like that. So again, there's very little evidence to actually support the idea that cannabis is a big impairer of drivers. That's not to say that it's not an impairer, it's just not as big as what they're saying. So there's big problems there with the testing of cannabis and how we look at it. And we really need to kind of get our heads out of the sands on this issue now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I, I think discretion is a good thing, but it's not such a good thing if the discretion goes the other way,
Hmm.
if you know what I mean. You hear about guards having discretion, and I go, well, yeah, that's great. What happens if the guard is sort of very anti-cannabis and anti-you,
Yeah.
and he doesn't like the way you're looking at him or talking to him, and then suddenly you get done? I think we need to be a little bit more. I think the sobriety testing across the board, and not just for this. I mean, there are people who can have, you know, really severe, uh, problems with diabetes, who can appear drunk, and can at times, not really be able, it can affect their levels of consciousness, and not be able to drive a car. And if they do a roadside test, you go, you don't look too clever, son. Oh, well, test me. And they test you for alcohol, test you for drugs. The person is impaired. I mean, I think we need to get away from this idea of drug driving or alcohol driving. Why don't we just call it impaired driving? Why
Yeah.
don't we look out for impaired driving? Why are we so caught up in this alcohol and drugs and numbers? If somebody is impaired, it's very easy. I mean, these roadside testing are not just walk the line. The really good roadside testing, and you know, uh, Gardaí who would be, or police officers around the world who are skilled in this, they get used to doing it. They know how to do it, and they get refresher courses on how to do it, and they make sure that they don't just do it once. If they're in any doubt about an aspect of it that they do it again to get it absolutely right. And then at the end of it, if they deem that the person is safe to get back in the car, they get back in the car.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's a great way to look at it. Can I ask one more question, Garrett? And I'll start leaving you go then, because I just realised we're an hour and a half into this, and I really do appreciate your time today. Thanks very much. But ending prohibition, do you think that would have a positive effect on the work that you do, or do you think it would have a negative effect? Like, do you think you would see an increase in the need for your services, or do you see that it would make your services more efficient in the work that they do?
I think it would be more efficient because you wouldn't get people being referred to you for, the law enforcement side of things. That's for start. I think it would be much more efficient in terms of being able to study drugs, so
Hmm.
we'd be able to know more about their effects, and as a result, we'd be able to inform patients better about those effects. Um, I deal with lots of people who drink alcohol problematically, and that's illegal drugs. So I think it could only be positive for the work I do. You're not going to get rid of the whole phenomenon of addiction. That's not gonna happen.
No,
Do you know what I mean?
definitely
It's
not.
not gonna happen.
And could
Yeah.
I ask your opinion on drug-assisted therapy, like heroin-assisted therapies and things like that, for
Yeah.
helping to get people off of the drug?
Yeah. Yeah, they're very, very effective. They are a number of heroin-assisted treatment facilities around the world, notably in Switzerland and Scotland, or in Netherlands and in Australia. There has been some trials in the UK. Really, really, really effective at achieving the goal. So less overdose risk, less transmission of viruses, uh, better well-being. Uh, Obviously, it's far cheaper, so no drug-related debt or intimidation. Um, Really, really effective. I mean, I think heroin-assisted treatment really is something that's really underutilized.
Hmm.
And I think we need to start doing it. But I think we probably need to do heroin-assisted treatment in the sense of, one of the things we're a bit like, it's a little bit like drug consumption rooms, all to do with injecting. There's a lot of people who are smoking drugs that would like to be now. The distinction, obviously, between an injecting room and a heroin assisted treatment. I think, um, the evidence is fairly, fairly kind of conclusive now that heroin assisted treatment works and will be able to keep engaged in treatment a group of people that would either otherwise be dead or on the streets, and that's costing the taxpayer loads of money anyway, one way or the other. So I'm greatly in favour of it, but I think heroin-assisted treatment should include heroin smokers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that as well. I think that's a great way, because obviously injecting can have a myriad of problems associated with it. And in terms of harm reduction,
Yeah,
smoking heroin is certainly the way forward. I think that's something that they do in places like Switzerland, that they would try to encourage service users to smoke the heroin. But if that wasn't something that they were up to, they would always be able to provide the injection there for them as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely right.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry, Garrett.
Yeah.
The minister at the moment, Frank Fionn, the guy in charge for national drug strategy, what's your opinion on some of the stuff that he's done as of late with the inner city drug task force and with the removal of the nurses from the National Drugs Oversight Committee? Do you think this guy is almost purposely trying to make it harder for progress to be made, for people to be helped in this? He doesn't seem to be doing anything beneficial in my eyes anyway, but maybe you might see something that I don't.
No, I don't.
You don't?
I'm underwhelmed with the job Frank Fegan has done. I may as well just say it.
Yeah.
None of the initiatives that are out that are there are been put. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
The issue is disgraceful with the nurses. These are I know one of them, Peter Kelly, is a really really good guy. He's involved in the International Society for Nurses Working in Addiction. He's raised really serious issues here. They've marginalized a very, very, very knowledgeable group of people who have a huge input into this, and they've brought in people that this is the problem with a lot of these groups. They will pick people. It might not surprise you. I've never been picked for any of these groups.
No, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
I'm fast experiencing. I'm highly qualified. Yeah. Read between the lines.
Yeah.
I why not? Because I have a different view.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go in there and go, yeah, that's a great job you're doing there, Frank. Yeah, great. Let's criminalize everybody. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to hear that from me, and they don't want to hear that. They want people who are in there who are agreeing with the point of view that is more or less maintaining the status quo.
Yeah. They want yes,
and
yes, man.
Hats off to the nurses for challenging them on this.
Yeah.
And they have my full support. I can assure you that.
Yeah, same here as well. And I think, but you knowing one of the nurses there, would it be, would my suspicion be correct in that these people who were removed, so would have been maybe kind of going against the grain of the likes of the prohibitionists, Frank Fionn and the likes of them, with their so-called health-led approach? Would these nurses have been kind of questioning that health-led approach?
Oh, no, I think there's no question about that.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter's brilliant. I mean, he gets it.
Yeah.
Very, very bright, very, very well qualified guy. I highly rate him. And yeah, he'd have a different. I don't know the ins and outs. I mean, it'd be wrong for me to say I know absolutely why nurses were excluded. I don't know why, but it is interesting.
Yeah, but when you look at the inner city drug task force with the appointment of Anna Quigley as the chairperson there, and then the immediate oh no, we're disbanding this group. This group is no longer in line with the drug task force ethos anymore. And then knowing Anna Quigley, I'm just kind of like that stinks. That stinks. Like that lady got appointed in a democratic process and they didn't agree with it, and they disbanded it. Now, I don't know the inner workings of what actually went on there, but I would have been quite happy to see Anna Quigley as a head of a drug task force above there, because I know that the work that lady has done in the past, it's been quite it's top. Like, it's really good.
Anna Quigley, I know Anna Quigley. I've worked with Anna Quigley in terms of drug policy. Anna Quigley is absolutely superb in what she does. And she's well able for these people who kind of try and challenge her. It's disgraceful. I mean, we should be putting people. I don't think, for instance, necessarily, it'd be great for people with the views you have and I have to be operating drug policy. You might think that's wonderful. I'm a fairly fair person in that regard. There are going to be people with different points of view, and they should be around the table. But you can't have it the other way, where everyone around the table is pretty much of one view.
Mm-hmm.
See, a lot of the way these committees happen, Martin, is that they're usually dominated by a few people who have very, very strong views and probably are well qualified in their own way, and the others kind of row in. There's a fear factor, really. That's just the way of the world. That's I don't know, that's an Irish thing, or that's the way it is, but it's always the way that there'll be people who will have quite strong views and push it through. I mean, I don't know what happened with the Minority Report and Justice Sheen, but he was the chair.
Yeah.
And he just came out with a bold statement. I disagree with decriminalisation and no scrutiny. I don't know whether there were dissenters in that group or whatever there was, but you can see what can happen when one person has a point of view.
Yeah, we actually went through that the Minority Report and the Majority Report there last week, I think it was, on the show here, actually, funny enough. and just highlighting that what goes on in there, that we can have a group of people that would kind of be pointing towards one direction, and then we've got this guy, the Justice Garrett Sheehan, at the chair, and he's just like, no, guys, you can't go this way, we have to go this way, and he undermined the work of the group by publishing his own minority report afterwards. And I actually had the pleasure, I suppose if you'd call it that, of attending a talk with Anna Quigley, actually, funny enough, and Judge Garrett Sheehan down here in Cork. It was organised by the Legal Society in UCC, the UCC Law Society, that's what it was. And in that talk, I was kind of questioning the fact that, questioning Judge on people getting criminalised for their drug use. Is it right that we criminalise people who have got an addiction for, say, something like heroin? And he was saying, no, we have to punish these people. We have to get them into the justice system, because it's in the justice system they're going to get the help they need. And I was just blown away by that. I was just kind of like, what, you want to get people into the justice system so we can get them into the health system from the justice system? It just screamed waste.
Like there's so many strands that I don't know what to say, really. I mean, okay, cynics might say, well, he's kind of feathering his own nest there, because it's in his interest to have the courts full of people. But other people might say, well, that's not what the issue is. The issue is he just personally believes that. He believes that. You have to remember as well with a lot of these people is that a lot of the people who have these views do talk to other people with similar views. So what they do is they all reinforce each other's prejudices. And they come to the conclusion that they're absolutely right and they're very fixed in their views. There isn't really any, the debate, it's very interesting. The drugs debate in Ireland is at a very remedial level in terms of actually the quality of it and the maturity of it. Mm-hmm. You get demonized from a view. I mean, I've often done radio shots, and the presenter will say to me, what does your profession make of you having these views? Which is stigmatizing in itself. It's almost like I'm some sort of like a Harold Shipman or something with these terrible, awful, evil views. And I said, look, I don't know. I think my view is in the minority of the people who are willing to talk. Is it in the minority of doctors? Probably is. But I'm pretty sure there are a lot of doctors who feel maybe not as strongly as I do, but probably feel along the lines I do. I know some of them have told me. Some people, I've had people, for instance, come up to me after a certain conference and say, I agree with you. You might think I'm sympathetic towards them. Actually not. I would say, well, start fucking talking about it. I'm hiding, telling me I'm doing great, and you're saying nothing. That's no good.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear you're afraid. Clearly, there's nothing wrong with talking and giving your opinion. I've done it for years, and I'm not in fucking jail.
Yeah.
So what's the problem?
Maybe you might have to...
I know...
go on, sorry, you were going to say?
No, I mean, I know that they're probably worried with their colleagues will think and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest there that maybe you should follow in the footsteps of, what's his name again? Jeez, his name's George Rowe. Sorry, his name jumped out of my head there for a sec. George Rowe, he set up the Youth Workers Against Prohibition, but for a while there, he would have been, much like your kind of self, he would have been out there alone almost. Many people standing behind him and saying, go on, George, go on, you're doing a great job. But he brought those others out into the spotlight, if you will, with the Youth Workers Against Prohibition. So maybe there's room there alongside of those for the drug addiction specialists.
It's funny you say that because I know Ger quite well through this, through kind of the whole drug policy stuff. And actually, I think he was on to me asking me to there's some sort of Oroptus presentation or something. So I have a lot of time for Ger, and I have a lot of time for anybody who puts themselves on the line like he has. And I think he has personally suffered.
Yeah, he has.
As a result of that, there are people sort of saying we don't like you saying this, and I never feel vulnerable in that way. I nailed my colours to the mast in this one. I went for it, and I do suffer. I have to say, Martin, from somebody tells me to do something. I don't stand on the grass. I tend to go on the grass and wear the football boots on the grass. I'm a bit like that. I know that's childish. If you tell me not to do something, or you tell me I must do something, I'm probably likely to do the opposite. So in a way, people should say, "Guy, you should really, supporting legalization. That's a great idea. Or maybe I might go the other way." I'm being facetious, but you get my point.
Yeah.
that's one of the problems. Like I remember I put something out there in relation to trying to get doctors to sign a letter about decriminalization, and a doctor came back to me and said, "Oh my God, you don't have to be very careful." She didn't really know me. She goes, you know, you're looking for drugs to be decriminalized, and she thought decriminalization and legalization were the same thing, and I agree with both, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
And I just wrote back and said, "Yeah, that's exactly the idea. You got 100%. So you don't be concerned about me. I'm absolutely. I don't want anything to do with that. It's fine.
No problem.
It's a free world. You don't want to have anything to do with it. Don't have anything to do with it. I don't mind." But she actually thought that I'd made a mistake. She thought there was some mistake in what I was writing. I'd written it wrong. I must have kind of been sleepwalking writing the article.
Yeah.
See, a lot of people, the interesting thing there is she wouldn't be aware, just because to show you how closed off people are. There are people that don't look at the news. I would have thought that all the doctors know my view, and I'm sure a lot of doctors do know my view. There's actually doctors out there having a clue. There's a lot of doctors out there don't know who I am.
Yeah.
So when you make this point of view, they think that oh God, it's so radical. Oh my God, he wants legalization of drugs. Yes, I do. And I'm not going to spare the horses on that. And I'll tell you why. Do you want to sit down and talk about it? But if you do want to talk about it, if you come in here with ignorance, I'm not debating with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you come in here lazily, having read The Guardian or the Wikipedia or something that's very prohibitionist, I'm not debating with you. You know, as I don't know whether it was Mark Twain said, "Don't argue with a fool because the public won't be able to tell the difference."
Yep.
You know, there's a lot of truth in that. You know, you can be brought down to that level very, very quickly when you're talking to idiots. I don't mind people coming in here who are prohibitionist and they'll argue the toss in it, and we'll get down to business. That's fine. But I don't know if you noticed this though, Martin. A lot of the prohibitionists are kind of, they are, you know, running scared in many ways. I don't want to mention anybody here, but you know, one of them has started to block people now on Twitter.
That's right. Yeah.
Who went on a whole purge of getting rid of them, and I've noticed now when that person is quoting,
A lot less comments.
A lot of the stuff has now suddenly been positive because all the dissenters are dead and gone, so to speak.
Yeah, they're making sure that their echo chamber is singing to their tune. That's pretty much what they're doing now.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, I've seen that happening as well, and it really it does speak volumes as to, you know, how much strength there is in their arguments. If that's their way of defending it, it's anybody who argues against my argument, I'm just going to block you. Your voice is going to be silenced. It really goes to show like that there must not be much strength or faith there in whatever arguments they're trying to protect by doing such a thing. Also,
they don't have very much conviction in their argument. It's a one-trick pony argument.
Yeah,
legalization makes it more available and there's more harm, and then they go quiet in prohibition. They don't say anything about prohibition.
No, they never will. They won't either, because it's not going to suit their agenda at all. Can I ask one final thing, and I'll let you go after this, Garrett, I promise. The Royal College of Surgeons Ireland, last 2 years ago actually, they invited yourself and a number of other speakers down for an event. Would I be right in saying that you were alone in that stage in your position, or because I think there was 5 of you up there on the stage along with the host, but the only person speaking any sense that I heard from that event was yourself.
I want to just say this, and I'm going to be open with this. I deeply regret doing that.
Really?
I deeply regret doing it. It was a very uncomfortable evening, to be honest with you. It was an anti-cannabis event. Alex Berenson was brought over, who's a crime novelist who knows next to nothing about cannabis. He's no claim to it. He's no expertise in it. And the Royal College of Surgeons brought over somebody with no expertise to teach us about cannabis. I didn't see any debate. I know Peter Reynolds wanted to kind of ask him, could he be in the other, but it wasn't a debate in the end of the day. It was Alex Berenson giving his spiel. It was an audience largely full of people probably of a prohibitionist disposition. It was hailed as some sort of academic event. It wasn't. There wasn't any debate. We all got a couple of things to say, and that was it. I know that there were a few people in the audience that were very unhappy with me, you know, people whose loved ones had suffered and they felt that cannabis was the cause of them. It's very tricky in a scenario like that. I didn't enjoy that, I have to say. You know, I was rounded on it was very, very tough kind of dealing with that, because you have the greatest sympathy for anybody who's lost a family member or anything like that. And you're never on a winner there with that.
Hmm.
They're vehemently against cannabis regulation and stuff like that. I didn't enjoy that, Martin, I have to say, and I regret doing it. I wouldn't do it something like that again. If I'm going to have a debate, we need a proper debate with proper speakers and people in the know. I don't mind
100%.
somebody who's very well qualified. There are people who are very well qualified who don't agree with cannabis legalization. They are most welcome. I remember telling a story, and you may have heard this story, and it's the importance of proper debate. You know who Howard Marks is? He's passed away now, and you know who Peter Hitchens is. And
Yeah.
Peter Hitchens told a story, and I'm not gone on Peter Hitchens. He's blocked me on Twitter, and so that's the end of our story. But Peter Hitchens told a story after Howard Marks died, saying that he was invited to a debate in some hall or some convention center somewhere about cannabis, and they arrived at the center, and it was clearly a pro-cannabis event, right? Clearly from the audience. And when Peter Hitchens came on, before they even got started, they were throwing like almost rotten potatoes. Get off the stage, get off the stage, get off the stage. So Peter Hitchens got up and realized that, I'm not going to get abused in this way, and he walked off. And at the very same time, Howard Marks stood up and walked off as well. And people were the organizer. Where are you going, Howard? He says, I'm walking off. If you can't treat that man with respect and allow him to debate his point, I don't want to be involved in this event. And they sat down, they had a great debate. And I hats off to Howard Marks for doing that, because it's very easy to look at Peter Hitchens as this odious man who spouts something. The man is entitled to his opinion. I don't agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't agree that the facts behind his opinion are kosher, but he is entitled to debate his opinion. And I do not want to see a situation where we have only one type of propaganda, and that's the propaganda that suits your own argument. I'm against that.
Yeah.
We can debate robustly. Yes, it can get emotional at times, but I have to say that story really struck me. And Howard Marks, hats off to him. I know he's gone and he's not with us anymore, but that was real man of him to do that, because it could have been easy. Everybody was up for Howard Marks. Great guy. He's our point of view. And I have to say, there's a message here. And one of the things, if there is, that really annoys me about the pro-cannabis side is some of them don't want to recognize any harms to cannabis. Mm-hmm. It's up and away. If you say anything bad about cannabis, you're wrong, you're evil. I've got into more scraps. I'm honest about that with people who have a go. And I've had other people come in and say, stop having a go at him. Yeah. He's fucking on our side, right? So I think you have to learn how to debate. Debate isn't about necessarily, I know we think it's about rubbishing the other person's point of view. It's more about putting forward your own sensible point of view. The more you put forward your own sensible point of view, the less the rubbish, if that's what you think it is going to be found out anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to maybe leave this conversation there, Garrett. I think that's a really nice takeaway for people. Don't take people prohibitionists, anything that they say personally. Again, just trying to find that common ground, and respect. I think respect is the most important word here of the day. Probably just show respect to one another, and we can really open up the doorways then to the proper conversations. Because as soon as somebody says something you don't like and you call them in X, Y, or Z, well, unfortunately, in that position, you've really lost the argument. I think when you're attacking a person rather than attacking their argument, and
totally.
So, Garrett, thanks very much. If there's anything else you'd like to add or anything like that before we leave it off?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everywhere. I'm glad I got the bit in about the whole drug driving and cannabis laws and stuff like that. So no, I'm happy to leave it at that. It's been an absolute pleasure, Martin. It's a topic I know you're deeply interested in, and you know I am, and I know there's a lot of other people, and I hope people who've been tuning in and have enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll do it all again sometime.
Definitely, yeah. Well, if they're anything like me, I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. So thanks very much again, Garrett. And I look forward to catching up in person. I'm sure we will cross paths and catch up there in person very soon. So yes, have a lovely weekend, Garrett, and all the best.
You look after yourself. See you, Martin. Bye-bye.
Bye, Garrett. So there we go, guys. Dr. Garrett McGovern. What an absolute pleasure it was to have him on. And as Garrett said, guys, I too hope that you enjoyed that conversation. Don't forget, guys, to hit the like button, share button, subscribe if you haven't already done so. But help get this talk out further and help get other people in to listen to this conversation. I think Garrett was amazing there, and he made some great points too, is when we're engaging with these prohibitionists online, don't forget that you're representing our community, and to behave yourselves, guys, be respectful. If there's people out there and they've got views that are different to yours, and if you want to engage with them, then engage with them in a respectful discussion. Attack their argument, and don't attack the person making the argument. I think that's probably the most important thing that we discussed there really today. That's probably the best advice Garrett gives to activists out there, people who are looking to kind of further this conversation, guys. Engage in it in a respectful manner, respect the people that you're arguing against, and that will really help further the campaign. So yes, nice one everybody in the audience. I see Casa de Strugas as well. Nice one for the support there, bud. And anybody else who might have asked a question, if I missed it in the comments, I apologise. I was trying to keep an eye on the comments as questions were flowing in. And comments, Casa de Strugas saying here, the chair of the Law Society said there's a shortage of resources in the courts to be wasted on cannabis possession, and Judge Sheehan said they have unlimited resources to deal with it. Like, what the F? Yeah. Judge Garrett Sheehan, he was definitely out of touch with reality. It's kind of funny, as high as I might be in cannabis at times, I've never been more out of touch with reality compared to some of these prohibitionists. Yeah, I've never been. Yeah, is that the right way of saying that? Those guys are much more out of touch with reality than me. Hunter K, nice one, Hunter, there for the comments. Two legends on the stream, both big balls of steel. I don't know how your backs aren't broken yet with carrying them big balls around with you. Thanks very much, Hunter. I really appreciate that. But as I say, I don't know about Garrett, but my balls are probably below average size. I'm just a normal person, guys. Nothing special about me. John Finian, great show today. Dr. Garrett McGovern was a great and interesting man. Could listen to him talk all day. And I noticed that I probably could have talked there with Garrett for easily another hour. Could have probably put in a Joe Rogan Lent episode there of 3 hours. But I did only ask him to come on for the hour. I got almost 2 hours out of him, which I'm absolutely forever going to be grateful for. I think that's going to be up there, but in the top episodes of this year anyway. It's only the first one. B9F says, ask them to stop kicking you on the ground while you listen to their argument. Yes. And who's that? Surprise Mofo. Great interview, Martin. Thanks very much, Surprise Mofo. And ONF as well. Travo Games. Both saying great interview there as well. Pods 4420, class talk, lads. Great listening to it. Nice one. Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in. Bridget Spalding out there as well. Great chat, lads. Thanks very much, Bridget. And anybody else who said something positive there in the comments, guys, thanks very much. I'll start ending the stream, and I'll get back with more. Hopefully Alexis will be home there later on, and we'll start playing maybe some It Takes Two if she gets home early enough. If not, we'll be on tomorrow. We'll definitely try to finish that game. So much love, guys. Keep it blazed out there. Peace, and keep her lit. Bye-bye.